for over 2 hours. We got there actually in about 32 hours because we'd broken and had to work on the car. Brake lines that went away. We had 3-wheel brakes and the transmission coming loose and the engine all flopping around. And we had a lot of time screwed up. We didn't do it as quickly as we had going down in the feasibility run, but we still broke the bike record by 7 hours. But the Mexicans cheated us out of 2 because they didn't come to work on time. So we still broke them by almost 5 hours, 4 hours and 35 minutes or something. Any rate, that's the way the very first thing was done. Now, first record setting. Now, my wife Shirley worked at Road and Track magazine. This is where the big deal is, because the Road and Track magazine they said, "Come to our house and we'll drink to your victory." And we came to their house on Lido Island, Newport Beach. And John says to Elaine, he says, "Isn't there a list of all the people in the world that should know about this?" Who in the hell's that? Well, now, Road and Track has every management person of every car manufacturer in the world, Europe, Japan, everywhere. All the PR types, all the editors of car magazines. There's 45 magazines. All the writers for those magazines. So there's this list of about 1,000 people. They, because they're literate type people in their offices, 33 people, I think, in Road and Track. I was in there a lot because my wife worked there. She ran the advertising desk. And they decided that there ought to be a press kit put out to all these 1,000 people around the world. And so they created the press kit. It says, "Buggies beats bikes in Baja." And that's about us. And so the very first race, I think, drew 68 people, something like that. And we met at the Bull Ring in Tijuana about 6 or 8 weeks later after this first record run. And the place is full of 4-wheel drives, Jeeps, and Broncos, and the boys from the backcountry with their 4-wheel drives. And they looked at our little Dune Buggy and said, "What do you think you're going to do with them damn things?" I said, "Well, we did pretty good. We set a record." "Well, you ain't going to do it now." Every one of those 4-wheel drives broke. They dotted the landscape, and we won. In the very first 6 automobiles in off-road racing, 5 of them were Meyers Manx's. The Meyers Manx was the perfect little ambulatory thing that rattled down a dirt trail very nicely because it has, you know what this is? That's called trailing arm suspension. See how it just went away and came back? That's better than these things that go up and down with all these vectoring forces. Not to say that they aren't good. They've gotten better than everybody, but the little Volkswagen at that time, with its suppleness, and the course was the cars were only 1,400 pounds, and the right wheelbase, they were not about the same length, but much lower, and so all their dynamics were better than a 4-wheel drives. I write an article, it's in my book, about Drino Miller. He worked for me, he was in the shop, and I'd heard that Ed Perlman was going to set the first 4-wheel drive record with a couple of Toyota Land Cruisers with their engines removed with Chevys in them. And now that makes it dangerous right there, just making the driver feel like he's a racer. Chevy V8 powered 4-wheel drives always could beat anybody up a sand dune or in a drag race. But I wouldn't say they're the great car for making a record in the length of 1,000 miles in Baja. They're going to nose into too many rocks and too many ups and downs, and they tip over they're not real pretty that way. There's a lot of things about the 4-wheel drive at that time didn't fit the dynamics of today's great cars. Now they put great big tires on the back so that they come down tail first. Just the rear tires are out there holding the front end off the ground. See, those poor little Toyotas with Chevys in them were probably nose heavy. Well, they broke. And I sent Drino and John Lawler, who was a writer at Road and Track, a friend. And Drino worked in my shop. He's a great mechanic. And I said, take old shit. Old shit was All the buggies in my shop were named Old Red, Old Blue, Old Yellow, and this brown car that had been made to be a brown metallic came out of the mold terrible, and we called it Old Shit. And anyway, I'd taken the spare tire and set it on the hood and drew a picture around it, cut it out, set the tire in the hole on the gas tank. And I said, take Old Shit and go chase those guys and help them. They want to set a new record. Maybe you can help them. And it was really that, just my heart, just saying, let's have that. And the little Volkswagen helped them a lot. But it was in La Paz 10 hours ahead of them.
Wow.
That set the first four-wheel drive records. See, what does that say? It says a lot about innocence and not real smart thinking and all that. But it's okay. It's the beginning. Because the beginning was full of that sort of thing. Just craziness. And, you know, the only of the 6 cars, 5 of them were Meyers Manx's. The other 6th one was a Nash Rambler. And the Nash Rambler is about as innocent as a race car as you can be. It's about as innocent as a little Volkswagen. And so what I think that came around to being was opening the door to all the dreamers in the world that thought they could be a Mario Andretti or some great race driver. But they couldn't afford to go to round tracks. They can't afford to be in Formula One racing. That's all for rich people. But off-road racing opens the door to every kid in every backyard. And there's so many dreams in the young mind that he wants to be there, that's the best part of off-road racing, is it opened the door to being an allowable way of going racing and become more than just a little backyard deal. With that huge push for road and track in the beginning, people are not aware of that, but the road and track name and had this inside knowledge of how to get things done. They were very, very successful as magazine publishers, and they gave that push to the very first stuff that we did in off-road racing. And it started it all up, and, you know, today it's monstrous. It's fun. But what I really like about it is that it opens the door to every kid, every 18-year-old that, come on, Dad, I want to be the driver. I can go fast, because that's what 18-year-olds think they're doing. It's just a part of that time in life. So I'm very happy about that it's become a big deal. But it's become a big deal because it's affordable.
Bruce, you started this off telling us that you weren't necessarily a motorhead or interested in the Manx was art to you, and you were an artist, and you were kind of downplaying your competitive spirit and talking more about your brilliance in the art world. But here in talking, putting yourself back into it, there's clearly a competitive nature in you, and you talk about the starts. You've been involved in all these things, the beginnings of these things. And we just finished up talking about the beginning of off-road racing, but there's so much before that got you to that point. There's probably people listening right now that they would know what a Meyers Manx is if they saw it, but they don't necessarily know the story behind it. The first time I saw a Meyers Manx or the likeness of a Meyers Manx, and I'm curious if I'm assuming you're aware of this, and you may very well have had something to do with it, but the buggy that Scooby-Doo and Shaggy cruised around in Scooby-Doo was a Manx. That's to me.
That was a reflection of the Meyers Manx. Yeah. The Meyers Manx started a phenomena, and I can't be that wonderful, but it did. And there's wonderful words written by other editors of what the car seemed to be. But what it did was attach itself to the imaginations, and it was affordable. And I think that was the best reason. I never grew up. I'm still a little kid, aren't we all? But this guy, Bruce Meyers, held something inside of him. He used to crawl around on the floor on Sundays to read the Sunday funnies. They were in 4-color. And Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and all these guys were in these funny little cars that were too small for their bodies, but they were sticking out of them, and the wheels were great big. And there was something about that essence of the cartoon car that is a part of the Meyers Manx, there were certain things about it that it had to have, that I knew that it must have, that it must have a sense of adventure, to be clung to by those too old for adventure, but they want it. It's something that I think we all like to break rules. You know, we live by our life of rules. If you get over the double line, you're going to get killed by the other guy coming. Everything we do, you got to pay the rent, you got to open the door, everything is by rules, whether you like it or not. That's the way it is. But the Dune Buggy says thumbs its nose at convention. See, and I think it's attraction. It's subliminal. I don't think they realize what they're doing. But so many people, it's, when you build a Manx, you wouldn't believe the number of fathers that have come to me over these 50 years to shake my hand for keeping his son out of drugs and bonding. Because the kid was in the bedroom and you could smell the grass, but he'd come out and say, "Look at the bitchin' Dune Buggy, Dad," in the magazine. Dad saw what he had to do, and he went and bought a kit and an old Volkswagen. Now, 50 years ago, the Volkswagens, when you took them apart, they were fresh. The grease leaked out of their torsion bars. They weren't rusty yet. Today, it's a terrible mess. You have to rebuild everything. But in those times, Dad saw what he had to do, and the boy came, and they built the car together over a period of months or longer. Today, Dad is gone. The boy is 54 years old. That's the Dune Buggy. I'll never sell it. It's a love affair.
Yeah.
And Mom and the others also fell into this thing. The kid never wanted to ride to the store with Mom in the Pontiac station wagon. No, take the buggy. It's more fun. And wherever you stop with the Dune Buggy, people come. It opens conversations because it says fun. That's the biggest message. It's really quite a race car because it falls within the race car's outline. A race car has to be light, has to be powerful, has to be a certain size. And it just does all that. It happened to be that. When Don Wilcox went slalom racing with Ted Trevor, they broke all slalom racing records for 3 years on the West Coast. I mean, against Corvettes and Ferraris and Cobras, and it doesn't matter. The car was, they laughed at the car when they first saw it come in, but at the end of the day, they weren't laughing anymore. Same thing in off-road racing. See, the car had the ability to be a winner properly handled by geniuses like Ted Trevor, who was a machinist and a fabulous guy that could, we need to do this to the car, and tomorrow morning there's a car sitting there with it. He's worked all night. So we had a lot of talent that carried the message of the Manx into the world of the racing records. They went to Pikes Peak and wiped everybody out. The Pikes Peak official says, "Get those damn Dune Buggies out of here." They did. They beat everybody. Yeah. There was 4 or 5 what they call championship cars, open wheel cars, that beat the buggies, but everything up to that point. So anyway, they have a wonderful racing record. Go ahead.
No, I was going to go back to you're talking about the father and son and the father recognizing what needed to be done and just that opportunity for father-son to bond. And I'm one of the recipients, not necessarily from the Meyers Manx side of it, but as I said earlier, I credited you with spawning an industry that ultimately created my pathway to college, and in the end, really, I mean, I make my living in the off-road racing industry and the Dune Buggy industry, really, and I've given you that credit, and I guess the question I have for you, and I know the answer. The question is, did you have any idea that you were starting what you started? And I think I know the answer, but then it's fun to sit here and pontificate over the fact that you just were following a passion, and then lo and behold, look what comes from it.
Yeah, great question, Ryan.
Do you know what I've never really given a damn about? Profit. Maybe that freed me up. I just love doing what I do. I'm a shop oriented. I'm not a management oriented. Management oriented thinks of ups and downs and profit. And everything has to have a profit or it doesn't exist as a business. And I never gave it that. I was all on to the essence of the pleasure, the artistic side. For instance, here's the artistic side.